Ditzy rich girl files her nails in front of black judge. His verdict ruins her life forever. Chloe sauntered into the courthouse as though she were strutting down a runway, dressed in a vibrant fuchsia designer suit adorned with glittering jewelry. She looked more prepared for an extravagant brunch than a courtroom appearance. Her oversized sunglasses rested atop her head, and the sharp clicks of her stiletto heels echoed through the hallways as she made her way toward the courtroom. Her expression was a blend of boredom and irritation, as if the entire ordeal were an unwelcome disruption to her otherwise flawless life. "I can't believe I have to be here," she muttered to her assistant, who trailed behind her, clutching a tiny dog nestled in an equally tiny designer bag. "All I did was drive a little fast. Everyone makes such a big deal out of everything these days." The assistant nodded nervously, clearly accustomed to Chloe's dismissive attitude. The incident Chloe referred to was far from trivial. A week earlier, she had been caught speeding through a quiet suburban neighborhood in her sleek black convertible. She had narrowly avoided hitting a child crossing the street and had collided with another vehicle. Instead of apologizing, Chloe had berated the other driver for being in her way. To her, it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Daddy will pay whatever they want," she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively as she entered the courtroom. "Why do I even have to show up? Couldn't he just send someone to handle this?" Her loud complaints drew the attention of others waiting in the hallway. Some shook their heads, whispering among themselves about her arrogance. Chloe either didn't notice or didn't care. She was too preoccupied with lamenting how much of her precious time this court appearance would waste. As the doors to the courtroom opened, Chloe strode inside, her heels clacking against the polished floor. The room was packed, and all eyes turned to her. Some raised their eyebrows at her flashy outfit and audacious demeanor, while others seemed visibly annoyed by her lack of respect for the solemn atmosphere. Chloe, however, remained unfazed. She settled into a chair at the front, pulling out her phone and scrolling through social media. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently about the importance of behaving appropriately, but Chloe waved him off. "Relax," she whispered back. "Daddy's got this." Her confidence was unshakable. After all, her father had bailed her out of every mess she'd ever been in. Why should this time be any different? Chloe smirked to herself, already envisioning the lavish lunch she would treat herself to once this ridiculous little hearing was over. What Chloe didn't realize was that her actions carried consequences far beyond what her father's wealth could resolve. 10 minutes later, Chloe sauntered into the courtroom, her heels clicking noisily against the floor. She was chewing gum and giggling at something on her phone, completely oblivious to the annoyed glances of those seated inside. The judge, a tall and dignified man named Judge Harrison, had already begun the session, and her tardiness interrupted his remarks. "Miss Carter, please take a seat," Judge Harrison said firmly, his voice echoing through the room. His sharp gaze landed on Chloe, who seemed utterly unfazed. Yeah, she muttered, popping her gum as she found her place. Instead of sitting quietly, Chloe sprawled back in her chair, pulling out her phone again to check her messages. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently for her to put it away. She rolled her eyes but complied, though her attitude made it clear she thought the whole thing was beneath her. Judge Harrison observed Chloe's behavior with growing disapproval. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor and unwavering commitment to justice, he had dealt with his fair share of entitled defendants. However, Chloe's blatant disrespect was testing his patience. As the details of the case were read aloud, Chloe stifled a laugh, muttering under her breath. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Chloe stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. "Honestly," she began with a smirk, "I don't even know why I'm here. It's not like anyone got hurt. I'm sure we can just write a check and call it a day, right?" The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the audience, and Chloe's lawyer buried his face in his hands, mortified. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow, but remained calm. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice steady but stern, "this is a court of law, not a place to flaunt your privilege. I suggest you take this seriously. Chloe didn't take the hint. Instead, she doubled down. Oh, come on, she said with a dismissive laugh. It's not like I'm the first person to speed. Can we just wrap this up? I have plans. Judge Harrison's expression hardened. Miss Carter, your disregard for the law and for the safety of others is unacceptable. This court will not be swayed by your wealth or your attitude. You will face the consequences of your actions. Chloe's smirk faltered for the first time. As the judge delivered his verdict, she realized that her father's money and influence might not be enough to save her this time. For once, Chloe Carter was forced to confront the reality that her actions had real and lasting consequences. Chloe's jaw dropped. $50,000? Are you kidding me? She exclaimed, her voice rising in disbelief. Do you even know who my father is? He'll have this overturned in seconds. Judge Marcus ignored her outburst, his expression unwavering. In addition to the fine, he continued, his tone firm and unyielding, you will complete 200 hours of community service, focusing on programs that promote road safety and awareness. This is not negotiable. Chloe's face flushed with anger. Community service? Do I look like someone who does community service? She snapped, gesturing to her designer outfit. This is ridiculous. I'm not some common criminal. The judge's gaze hardened. Miss Bennett, your privilege does not exempt you from the law. If anything, it should compel you to set a better example. Your actions have consequences, and it's time you learned that. Chloe opened her mouth to argue further, but her lawyer, visibly panicked, grabbed her arm and whispered urgently, Chloe, stop. You're only making this worse. She yanked her arm away, glaring at him. Worse? How could this possibly get worse? Judge Marcus leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. It can get much worse, Miss Bennett. If you continue to disrespect this court, I will not hesitate to impose additional penalties, including the suspension of your driver's license and, if necessary, jail time. The word jail seemed to hit Chloe like a slap. Her bravado faltered, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Jail? You can't be serious, she said, her voice quieter now. I am entirely serious, Judge Marcus replied. This court does not take reckless endangerment lightly, nor does it tolerate blatant disrespect. Consider this your wake-up call. Chloe sank back into her chair, her earlier confidence replaced by a mix of anger and disbelief. She crossed her arms, muttering under her breath, but she didn't dare speak out again. The judge turned to address the courtroom. Let this serve as a reminder to everyone present. The law applies to all, regardless of wealth or status. Justice is not for sale, and accountability cannot be avoided. As the gavel came down, signaling the end of the hearing, Chloe sat frozen, her mind racing. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. For the first time in her life, her father's money and influence hadn't been enough to shield her from the consequences of her actions. Her lawyer leaned over, his voice low. Chloe will appeal, but you need to tread carefully. Judge Marcus isn't someone to mess with. Chloe didn't respond. She was too busy replaying the judge's words in her head. Justice is not for sale. The phrase echoed, unsettling her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. As she stood to leave, the weight of the courtroom stairs bore down on her. The whispers followed her out, a chorus of judgment and disbelief. For once, Chloe Bennett wasn't the center of attention because of her glamour or wealth. She was the center of attention because of her downfall. Outside the courthouse, her assistant hurried to keep up as Chloe stormed toward her waiting car. Call my father, she snapped, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Tell him to fix this. Now. The assistant nodded, fumbling with her phone, but Chloe barely noticed. She slid into the back seat of her car, slamming the door shut behind her. As the driver pulled away, she stared out the window, her reflection staring back at her. A young woman who had always gotten her way, now facing the harsh reality that her actions had consequences. For the first time in her life, Chloe Bennett felt small. and it was a feeling she didn't know how to handle. Over the next few weeks, Chloe's life began to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. The $50,000 fine was a drop in the bucket for her family, but the community service was another story. Assigned to work with a local organization that educated young drivers about road safety, Chloe found herself in unfamiliar territory. The first day, she showed up in designer jeans and a silk blouse, only to be handed a neon vest and a stack of flyers. "You're kidding, right?" she said, staring at the vest in disgust. The program coordinator, a no-nonsense woman named Maria, didn't bat an eye. "This isn't a fashion show, Miss Bennett. Put it on and get to work." Chloe's protest fell on deaf ears, and by the end of the day, she was exhausted and humiliated. But as the weeks went on, something unexpected happened. She began to hear stories from the people she met. Stories of lives lost to reckless driving, of families torn apart by preventable accidents. One afternoon, a teenage girl approached her after a workshop. "My brother was hit by a speeding driver last year," the girl said, her voice quiet but steady. "He didn't make it. People like you, they don't think about the consequences. But they're real." Chloe didn't know what to say. For the first time, the weight of her actions truly hit her. She had always thought of herself as untouchable, but now she was beginning to see the ripple effects of her choices. By the time her community service was complete, Chloe was a different person. She hadn't lost her spark or her confidence, but she had gained something far more valuable: perspective. As she stood before Judge Marcus one final time to confirm the completion of her sentence, she surprised everyone, including herself, by speaking up. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "I know I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them, and I want to do better." Judge Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I hope you mean that, Miss Bennett. The law exists to protect people, not to punish them. Use this experience to make a positive change." Chloe left the courtroom that day with a newfound sense of purpose. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to face it, not as the entitled heiress she had once been, but as someone who understood the value of accountability. And for Chloe Bennett, that was a lesson worth far more than $50,000. Chloe shuffled out of the courtroom in silence, her designer heels clicking faintly on the floor. The usual confidence in her step was gone, her head hung low, and her shoulders sagged under the weight of the judge's sentence. Her once vibrant outfit, a bold pink blazer and sparkling jewelry, now seemed absurdly out of place as she was led toward the holding area. Reporters outside snapped photos, shouting questions about her reckless driving and the unexpected outcome of her trial. Chloe didn't respond. She barely registered the flashing cameras, her mind racing with panic. Inside the jail, reality struck even harder. The cold metal bars, the sterile walls, and the echoing sounds of other inmates were a far cry from the luxurious life Chloe had always known. She was processed quickly, her designer clothes replaced with a standard-issue jumpsuit. The humiliation was unbearable. "This can't be happening," she muttered to herself, clutching the thin mattress on her bunk. "Daddy will fix this. He has to." But as the days turned into weeks, Chloe began to realize that her father's influence had its limits. Despite his best efforts, the judge's decision stood firm. For the first time in her life, Chloe was truly on her own. The community service portion of her sentence began after her release from jail. Assigned to work with a local road safety organization, Chloe was tasked with speaking to high school students about the dangers of reckless driving. The irony wasn't lost on her. On her first day, she stood awkwardly in front of a classroom of teenagers, her designer heels replaced with sensible flats, her glittering jewelry absent. The students stared at her, some with curiosity, others with judgment. "Hi," she began hesitantly, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "I'm Chloe Bennett. I'm here to talk to you about road safety." The room was silent. Chloe took a deep breath and began to share her story. At first, her words were stiff and rehearsed, but as she spoke, something shifted. She found herself recounting the details of that fateful day. The speeding, the near miss with the child, the collision, and her dismissive attitude afterward. "I thought I was untouchable," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought my money and my family name would protect me from the consequences of my actions. But I was wrong." The students listened intently, their expressions softening as Chloe continued. "I didn't think about the people I could have hurt, or worse. I didn't think about the families I could have destroyed. I was selfish, and I paid the price for it." By the end of her talk, the room was silent. Then one student raised their hand. "Do you regret it?" they asked. Chloe paused, her eyes welling with tears. "Every single day," she said quietly, "and I hope my story can help you make better choices than I did." As the weeks went on, Chloe's perspective continued to shift. She began to take her community service seriously, pouring her energy into creating impactful presentations and connecting with the students. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of purpose, a feeling that she was making a difference. Her father, initially furious about the sentence, began to notice the change in his daughter. "You've grown up," he said one evening over dinner. "I'm proud of you, Chloe." The words meant more to her than she expected. When her 300 hours of community service were complete, Chloe stood before Judge Marcus one final time. The courtroom was quiet as she addressed him. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but sincere, "I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to learn from my mistakes. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm committed to being a better person, someone who takes responsibility for their actions and respects the law." Judge Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Miss Bennett, it's clear that you've taken this experience to heart. I hope you continue to use it as a foundation for positive change." As Chloe left the courtroom that day, she felt a sense of closure. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to face it, not as the entitled heiress she had once been, but as someone who understood the value of accountability and the importance of making amends. And for Chloe Bennett, that was a lesson worth far more than any fine or jail sentence. As Chloe stepped into the world once more, the weight of her past mistakes hung heavily on her shoulders, but so did a newfound sense of purpose. The simple outfit she wore, a far cry from the designer label she once flaunted, felt like a symbol of her transformation. She took a deep breath, the crisp air filling her lungs, and looked around at the world she had taken for granted for so long. Her first stop was the home of the family whose car she had hit. She had written them a letter during her time in jail, but now she wanted to apologize in person. Standing on their doorstep, she hesitated, her hand trembling as she raised it to knock. The door opened, and a woman in her mid-30s stood there, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. "Chloe Bennett," the woman said, her tone cautious. "Yes," Chloe replied, her voice soft. I wanted to apologize. In person, for what I did." The woman studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." Over a cup of tea, Chloe listened as the woman, named Sarah, shared how the accident had impacted her family. The car had been their only means of transportation, and the repairs had been a financial strain. But more than that, the incident had left her children fearful of crossing the street. "I'm so sorry," Chloe said, tears welling in her eyes. "I was selfish and reckless, and I didn't think about how my actions could hurt others. I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right." Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." Chloe left their home with a heavy heart, but also a sense of relief. It was the first step in her journey to make amends, and it gave her the courage to keep going. Over the next few months, Chloe threw herself into her community service, using her platform to advocate for road safety. She partnered with local organizations to create workshops for young drivers, sharing her story in hopes of preventing others from making the same mistakes. Her presentations were raw and honest, and they resonated with her audiences in ways she hadn't expected. One day, after speaking at a high school, a teenager approached her. "Your story really made me think," the girl said. I used to think speeding was no big deal, but hearing what you went through, it changed my perspective. Chloe smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. That's all I can hope for, she replied. If my mistakes can help even one person make better choices, then it's worth it. As her community service hours came to an end, Chloe found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The entitled, self-centered girl who had strutted into the courtroom that first day felt like a stranger. In her place was someone who understood the value of accountability, empathy, and humility. Her relationship with her father had also changed. While he had initially been furious about her sentence, he had come to respect the person she was becoming. "I'm proud of you, Chloe," he said one evening over dinner. "You've grown in ways I never expected." Chloe smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. "I'm proud of me too," she admitted, "but I know I still have a lot to learn." As she stepped into this new chapter of her life, Chloe carried with her the lessons she had learned the hard way. She knew she couldn't erase her past, but she could use it to build a better future, not just for herself, but for the people around her. Judge Marcus's decision had been a turning point, not just for Chloe, but for everyone who had followed her story. It was a powerful reminder that justice doesn't bend to wealth or privilege, and that accountability is a universal principle. For Chloe, the experience had been humbling, transformative, and ultimately redemptive. She had come into court expecting her father's money to shield her from responsibility, but instead, she had been forced to face the truth. No amount of wealth could erase the harm caused by her reckless actions. In the end, it wasn't about her father's ability to fix things. It was about her growth as a person and her commitment to making amends. Her story was no longer one of reckless driving. It was a story of accountability, transformation, and a lesson learned the hard way. As Chloe walked away from the courthouse one final time, she carried with her a new sense of responsibility, knowing that justice had been served, not just for her, but for the countless others who had been impacted by her actions. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. As the world continues to change rapidly, being responsible is more important than ever. Take a lesson from Chloe's story. Don't let pride or privilege blind you. Always be mindful of the consequences of your actions, big or small. Slow down, listen more, and put yourself in the shoes of others. Responsibility is not just about following the law, but also about respecting and empathizing with your community. Let every day be an opportunity to become a better version of yourself.